Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Was Prime Minister Modi's state visit to the United States a transforming moment, as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said it was likely to be? How significant were the defense and high technology deals that were concluded during the visit? Was President Obama's comments to Christiane Amanpour for CNN an accident and a coincidence, or was it in fact a deliberate shot across India's bows? And was India's angry reaction to President Obama, both from the Indian Defense Minister and Finance Minister, as well as India's social media's angry response to Sabrina Siddiqui, ill-judged, and has it gone down badly in America? And finally, did this visit show that the relationship between India and the United States is truly founded on shared values? Or does it more conclusively suggest that it is actually founded on shared interests? Those are the questions that I shall put today to the Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, Professor Ashley Tellis. Professor Tellis, let me start with a simple question. What is your assessment of Prime Minister Modi's state visit to Washington?
Well, first, Karan, thank you for having me on the show again. It's a pleasure to see you. Let me answer your question directly. I think it was a very good visit. Clearly, it was accompanied by all the pomp and circumstance that state visits have. But the executive branch and the Congress both went out of their way to welcome the Prime Minister as they should have. To me, the outcomes were actually very interesting to watch. Both sides got what they wanted. The Biden administration wanted to signal that India is a very important partner of the United States, both in the Indo-Pacific and globally. And I think that was conveyed both in the symbols and in the substance. From Prime Minister Modi's point of view, obviously, I can't speak to that with authority, but what I can infer was that he too was extremely satisfied with the outcomes. He got the things that he wanted, particularly in the technology space, which was very important. To him. All the conversations prior to the visit really centered around technology and technology transfers. And I think the character of the reception he got also provided a personal validation for him, which is, I presume, useful in India's domestic politics. So all said, I think both sides, have reason to walk away from this visit with satisfaction.
I'll come to the outcomes in detail in a moment's time, but let me ask you two preliminary questions to set the scene, so to speak. Before the visit happened, the United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said it would be a transforming moment. Kurt Campbell said it would consecrate the relationship. Now that the visit's over and we've had a week or so to analyze the outcome, did it achieve those predicted outcomes, or were those a bit exaggerated?
Well, all governments like hyperbole. When I was in government, I sometimes had the task of drafting statements, and we reached out to our thesaurus for the most exaggerated adjectives that you could find to describe the events that we were supposed to be describing. But there's no harm done, right? I think this was certainly an important visit. It was an important waypoint in the maturation of the transformation in the relations between both countries. But if I were to put my analyst's hat on for a moment and answer that question more seriously, I would say in the post-Cold War period, there has been only one transformative state visit. And that was Manmohan Singh's visit to Washington in 2005. Because it produced the framework for the civil nuclear agreement, which really opened the doors to a new relationship between the United States and India. If you want to push the envelope and look for runners up, I would suggest there are possibly two other visits which would qualify as runners up in the sequence. The first would probably be President Clinton's 2000 visit to India, not because of great outcomes, but because he helped redefine the US position on Kashmir, which I suspect will really be long lasting. And then the second runner up would be President Bush's 2006 visit, which saw the conclusion of the US India negotiations on the separation plan and the recommitment of the United States to amending its own law with respect to civil nuclear cooperation. But clearly, if you look for defining visits, I think Manmohan Singh's 2005 visit really is in a class by itself.
Now, I will come to the details of the outcome in a moment's time, but bearing the broad outcome, which you've already mentioned in mind, is the India-US relationship, in your opinion, strategically underpinned by shared concerns about China and shared investment in terms of economic investment as well as defense sales? Or is it, in fact, defined by shared values, which is something both governments claim, but analysts like you and Daniel Markey are very skeptical of?
Well, I think the convergence on interests is central and will remain central as long as China remains a serious challenge to both the United States and India. I think the convergence on values still remains an aspiration. It's in fact tragic because it needn't have been this way. And until very recently, I think, one could say with a straight face that we are united by both interests and values. I think the issues of values have now become contested, both in the United States and in a different way also in India. So I would say the issues of values convergence represent an aspiration that both sides have. We would like to see that convergence deepen. But I think Dan Markey is right on this one, that we're going to take hits on the issues relating to values, and they will become an issue that will have to be managed very actively in the bilateral relationship in ways that we had not have had to manage before.
Even on the issue of convergence of interest, let me raise a quibble or a niggle, perhaps, that you raised in your foreign affairs essay in early May, which was entitled America's Bad Bet on India. You said there, and I'm tracing it, that there are limits to how far India would concur with America on China. You felt that India was unlikely to support America on the Taiwan issue. Now, one thing that has been noted in India is that Modi, in his address to Congress, spoke about India's commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. In the joint statement that the two countries issued together, that talks about freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. In your eyes, is this a sign that India's reluctance is diminishing, or do you think India still remains substantially a bad bet?
Well, I'm not sure that India is a bad bet, but the fact is that the convergence on a free and open Indo-Pacific actually predates the term itself. People forget that when Prime Minister Vajpayee came to the United States, I think it was in 2002, he made the argument for the first time that we seek an Asia that is not crowded by one single power. That there is space for other countries to express themselves and to thrive. And that idea, in a sense, has been the core of India's foreign policy throughout the post-Cold War period. So the fact that India has come out publicly in support of the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific is something that has just been an evolution of that original insight articulated by Prime Minister Vajpayee. So I don't see any differences with respect to the principle, but how that principle is applied in terms of action, I think there is still room for negotiation. And I do not think that the United States should infer from India's commitment to that principle that it will simply join the United States in every detail in the implementation of that policy.
And this means, if I've read your answer correctly, that the doubts or concerns that you raised in your Foreign Affairs article continue. And there you said that whilst India seeks American support in terms of its problem with China on the line of actual control, you had severe reasons to question whether India would extend its support to the United States in terms of Taiwan. Those doubts, those concerns remain despite anything that the Prime Minister may have said rhetorically, either to Congress or in the joint statement.
I think that's right. My view has always been that India's objective has been to strengthen itself. And it is in America's interests that India strengthen itself so that it can balance China independently. But the fact that the United States and India agree on so many things, including on some things pertaining to China, does not imply that our strategies are going to be identical or that India is going to look for opportunities to join America's fights with China when its own strategic interests are not implicated. And that is something that we in Washington need to appreciate very, very clearly.
Let's then, against that background, examine in some detail the outcomes. There's a lot of breathless coverage in India about the deal to buy General Electric's F414 jet engines and the MQ-9 Predator drones. Before I talk to you about the details, how significant are these two deals?
Well, I think they're very important. But again, the facts matter and the facts should be taken into account. The MQ-9 Predator deal is not a done deal as yet. This is a deal that was offered actually by President Trump. So it's been many, many years since the deal was tabled. And India has examined the deal in great detail. And the biggest challenge that it has faced is essentially the problem of constrained budgets, that these are very expensive platforms. And India is still looking for ways to manage both the costs of the acquisition as well as the Make in India components. I think this deal will come through, but it's not quite done yet. On the engines, I think that is quite significant. And this is, again, something that has been in the works for about 2 years. It was originally meant to be a straightforward purchase of engines for India's LCA program. Thanks to the initiatives of the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, it got transformed from a purchasing effort to a Make in India effort. And Mr. Doval and his counterpart, Jake Sullivan, really worked very hard to get the US to agree to the idea of a co-produced engine in India. That was decided in the anticipation of this visit. And I think that is a very big step forward because we usually do not encourage co-production of advanced jet engines in third countries other than our allies. So this is a big step forward.
Quickly on the Predator deal, the Indian opposition has raised questions about the price at which the Predators will be bought. The Indian opposition is claiming that they will be the most expensive Predators sold. Other countries have got them cheaper. And the government has responded by saying that the price as yet has not been decided. The opposition, in effect, is talking through its hat. But I'll leave that and park it on one side. The concern I want to raise with you is, could there be a problem as far as the company is concerned over the Make in India component? Apparently, the amount that has been offered is somewhere between 8 and 9%. India is letting it be known it wants it raised to something close to 18-20%. Could that be a sticking point as far as the company is concerned? May it require more transfer of technology than the company is prepared to accept?
I mean, this is a question that is actually best addressed to General Atomics, but I want to underscore the structural issue that you're raising. Whenever you move to a Make in India program, the costs of the item that is being made are by definition going to increase. And that's a very simple reality of economics, right? Because the manufacturing plants are in the United States. If you simply buy off the shelf, you get whatever the market price is. Now, if you are asking the company to move tooling, to move equipment to India, to manufacture what is a relatively small percentage of the output, then the unit costs of every item manufactured in India are by definition going to be more expensive. So this is not a problem that is unique to the predator. It is a problem that is unique essentially to the application of the Make in India program. And this will apply to any defense equipment that is manufactured in India. And so the government of India has to make a choice. If you are attempting to minimize costs, then you're better off simply buying things off the shelf. If you are trying to maximize the technological transfer, then you have to be prepared to pay the price for it, which is higher unit costs for the item manufactured in India.
Your answer, of course, also speaks to the concern about price raised by the opposition. And in a sense, you're saying to them, it's bound to cost more than predators would have cost other countries if the other countries bought them off the shelf, because you want to make an India element introduced into the process. But let me ask you a connected question. Does India have the capacity to absorb so much high-end technology?
I think it does. Remember that many of the high-end technologies that are going to come to India are going to come in incremental form. It's going to take time. Nobody transfers the technology in one go, and India does not absorb the technology in one go. Even look at the jet engines, for example. It will take 4 to 5 years before the lines are set up, before India can build up the human capital base or apply the human capital base to absorbing the technology. So there's an element of time that is built into all these programs. And does India have the capacity to absorb it in the abstract? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Could the jet engine deal stumble in Congress and fail to get a nod? Because Daniel Markey, when he spoke to me roughly on the 21st of June, was firmly of the opinion that because the two countries do not unequivocally share values, there's no guarantee that they won't be very different countries 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And bearing that in mind, he thought it would be inadvisable for America to give these engines, and particularly with something like 80% transfer of technology. So could this be a concern that occurs in Congress when that nod is being sought?
Well, let me address the factual part of the question, which is, will this be a problem in Congress? I think the answer to that is no. Because whatever disquiet exists on Capitol Hill about India, I don't think that disquiet has reached levels where the US Congress is willing to curtail technology transfers that are proposed by the administration. So once the administration notifies the details about the GE engine deal, I think it will go through. I do not have any hesitation in saying that.
Now, these deals, both the Predator deal and the GE engine deal, are happening at a time when there are serious question marks about Russia's ability to supply weapons and arms to India. In fact, the S-400 is already delayed. We don't know how badly delayed, but delayed we know it is. Do you hereafter see India buying more of its high-end weaponry from America rather than Russia?
Well, I think India is going to accelerate its efforts at diversifying procurement, especially of advanced technologies. But I'm not persuaded that the United States will be the perfect one-for-one replacement of Russian origin equipment. And the reason for that is twofold. One, American equipment is generally much costlier than its Russian counterparts. And for a country like India, which has constrained defense budgets, unit cost of equipment is an important consideration. The second is American technology is often over sophisticated. I mean, it is designed for the United States, which is, a capital intensive military. And so the capabilities in American technology are exquisite. And those capabilities are often not what India needs. So my expectation is that as India diversifies, of course, the United States will continue to be an important source of supply, but India would look really to intermediate suppliers like France, like Israel, like the UK, like Germany, rather than the United States as its first port of call. And that is really defined by the circumstances that India finds itself in. And that should not be a problem for us. I mean, if India is diversifying by reaching out to other Western partners, that is in American interests.
And for the sake of the audience, I'll point out that the Indian papers have published articles in the last couple of days which say that the French are making an enormous effort to ensure that the Safran engine, if that's the correct way of pronouncing the company's name, is the engine that India acquires for the advanced combat jet that is still at the planning stage. And the French, again, according to these reports, are prepared to make a huge amount of technology available. So hopes that GE has that the F414 will be used for the advanced plane may not necessarily fructify. But leave that aside. I was simply bringing that on board for the audience. What about the semiconductor investment by Micron? I'm told that 70% of the 2.75 billion investment is actually coming from the Indian central government and the Gujarat government. And secondly, India's Minister of IT and Electronics has accepted that this is for semiconductor packaging and not the actual chips or wafers as they are called. So bearing those 2 points in mind, how landmark is this deal? Or is this also prone to a bit of hyperbole?
Well, India is not a natural candidate for semiconductor manufacturing. For the simple reason that if you really want to manufacture semiconductors, you are getting into a highly capital intensive business where investments on the order of tens of billions of dollars, are required. Now, India wants to get into this business, and I think eventually India will become part of the global semiconductor manufacturing supply chain. But to expect that, Western companies that are involved in manufacturing semiconductors, especially advanced semiconductors, will come to India and start manufacturing from scratch, I think that is simply infeasible. Now, the fact that India is providing financial incentives to Micron and to others should not be surprising, because you really need to put considerable inducements on the table to get companies that already have supply chains in place to move out of the supply chains and set up shop in India. And so if India is serious about going down this route, then it will have to spend real money to make this happen. And that is going to take time. And it's going to take many, many more billions of dollars than you have even indicated. Because this is not India's comparative advantage. And the wisdom of actually India looking at becoming a semiconductor manufacturing entity, to my mind, is still something that needs, most serious scrutiny.
Yes, and I'll point out to the audience that Raghuram Rajan, a professor in Chicago and also former governor of the RBI, has publicly suggested that in terms of the jobs you're creating and in terms of the fact that actually you're packaging and not producing the chips, it might not be worth the investment. But again, that's a question I leave for economists. I'm simply indicating that people like Raghuram Rajan have raised the sort of doubts you've just indicated yourself. Is it wise to go down this route?
Well, the important point to keep in mind, though, is that if you've got to figure out what your objective is, right? If your objective is maximizing employment, then semiconductors are probably the worst way to do it. Because semiconductor factories are what are called in the trade dark factories. They have no people. It is essentially machines making machines. And that's what really accounts for the cost, because these machines are extraordinarily expensive. They employ very few people. They require extremely high levels of energy and water. And so these are not designed for employment, maximization. So why would India get into this business? I think there are two reasons to get into this business. One is to leaven the technology that India is capable of manufacturing. And so technology transfers, potentially could be a value here. And the second is India wants to get into the global supply chain for advanced electronics. And both those are, laudable goals. The question is you have to do the cost benefit analysis and ask whether manufacturing semiconductors is the way to go about doing that. And that's something for the government of India and, sort of the Indian people to figure out.
Let's come, Professor, tell us to the political dimensions and aspects of the relationship. As far as I can tell, Ukraine didn't figure prominently in the public statements made either by President Biden or Prime Minister Modi. Do you believe the White House has reconciled to India's refusal to criticize Russia, as well as its sharp increase in the purchase of Russian oil, which is now pretty close to 46, 47%? Or is that an irritant that's simply been suppressed for strategic reasons?
No, I think there is a understanding of India's position. It doesn't leave the US comfortable, but there's very little that can be done about it in the near term. I believe the issue was discussed between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. Both sides understand where the other is coming from. And I think both sides made the judgment correctly that there was nothing to be gained by flaunting those differences beyond what is already known. The most important thing, in my view, is that India needs to think about what the end game and its own strategy is, because there are issues pertaining to a weakening Russia. There are issues pertaining to instability within Russia itself, and we saw that with the Wagner mutiny. There are issues pertaining to Russia-China relations. And there are questions, and this goes back to the S-400 issue that you raised earlier. There are questions about whether Russian arms are really as sophisticated as advertised, because many of the Russian systems that have been employed in Ukraine in the last several months have really not been able to achieve, the operational successes that people presumed they were capable of prior to the war. So there are a whole series of issues that India needs to think about with respect to the Ukraine war. And those go beyond what, I expressed in a joint statement or in some other form.
What about India's democratic and human rights deficit? 75 members of Congress wrote to President Biden expressing concern. There are reports, which I can't confirm and verify, that over 100 representatives and senators were not present when Prime Minister Modi addressed Congress, and certainly the American press was sharply critical of India. What sort of impact did all of this have on the visit?
Well, I think this is a new problem that we are coming to terms with. It was not an issue in the bilateral relationship over the last several decades. We had differences of interests throughout the Cold War. Even after the Cold War, there were differences of interest with respect to responsibility to protect the outer limits of state sovereignty and so on and so forth. But the fact that now the contestation over values has entered into the mix leaves me really disconcerted, because this can become a serious impediment in years to come. I think at the moment, it has been managed by extraordinary efforts on both sides. Both the Indian side and especially the US side went out of its way to minimize all the discordance about differences in values. And when you talk about difference in values, it really comes down to two things. It comes down to the question of the character of India as a liberal democracy, not as a democracy. We are all agreed that India is a very vibrant democracy, but the liberalism of that democracy is really what Americans are sort of concerned about. And then two, part of that liberalism, the very specific question is, the freedom to religious minorities and so on and so forth. These were never issues in the past. The fact that they are now beginning to cleave the administration, and do not underestimate this. There are deep divisions within the administration about the perception of India and the quality of its liberal democracy. The fact that it's cleaving, India's supporters on the Hill, the fact that the elite media in the United States is now deeply concerned. You saw the character of the commentary both before the visit and during the visit. And the fact that the Indian diaspora is also cleaved with respect to these issues, to my mind, is very, very unfortunate because it means that things could get harder amidst these kinds of differences. These are not problems that we had, 20 years ago when we were negotiating the civil nuclear deal. If we had them, I promise you, we would never be able to get that deal through Congress or through the international community. But today, these are real problems, and these are problems that we really need to find solutions to.
Then let me at this point ask you about President Obama's comments to Christiane Amanpour for CNN about India's treatment of Muslims, and in particular, I suppose, his apprehension that India could pull apart. Was it just a coincidence that he spoke and said these precisely bang in the middle of the visit, while Mr. Modi was actually with Mr. Biden in Washington? Or do you think there could be some truth to conspiracy theories which, float around India furiously, that this was done deliberately as a sort of good cop, bad cop strategy between Biden and Obama? Biden felt he couldn't say these things publicly, but they needed to be said. Obama, as a retired president, speaking in an interview, oddly enough, from Greece, could say them and make the point. So which of the two, coincidence or a deliberate good cop, bad cop strategy?
Well, the conspiracy theorists in India clearly have hyperactive imaginations. That's the first thing to be said. I do not believe that this was a conspiracy. I do not believe it was planned by the White House. We live in a very active and robust democracy in the United States. You go to a former president who has followed India very closely, and you ask him a question and expect that he will speak his mind. And that's exactly what, President Obama did. He spoke his mind. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it, but the point is, he will give you the same answer every time you ask him that question. The White House didn't plan this. This was not a good cop, bad cop sort of strategy. I just think this was, another citizen who's a thoughtful citizen, who's played an important part in sustaining this relationship, who, when asked the question, answered the question truthfully. Now, remember,
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say that, this is a theme that President Obama has articulated in the past. And when he visited India, in fact, for his own official visit, he did allude to these concerns. So what he said in that conversation with Ms. Amanpour did not come as a surprise.
In fact, he said it when he was chief guest for Republic Day, the first American president to ever be chief guest. And he said it, if I'm right, the morning after. It was his last day in India. He had to leave early because I think the king of Saudi Arabia was dying or had died, and he curtailed his visit and flew back. But let me put this to you. The Obama comments have been met with a furious response, not just from the press or social society, but by two Indian ministers. The defense minister and the finance minister not only were angry, but publicly accused Obama of bombing Muslim countries and thus suggesting, how dare he be critical of India's treatment of Muslims. And at the same time, I'll point out that the question asked by the Wall Street Journal journalist Sabrina Siddiqui brought on her head a torrent of abuse from Indian social media. How are these two responses viewed in America? And have they perturbed the White House in particular and made it wonder, what sort of country have we associated with?
Well, I don't know what the view in the White House is, but I mean, just as a citizen watching this, it is somewhat disconcerting. I mean, I think the responses are overwrought. They're not really warranted. And, one must expect that in any democracy, or for that matter, in any free society, people will have opinions on a variety of things. And those opinions on occasion will be articulated. And that's just the nature of the game. There are things that are said in India about the United States that no one here particularly gets upset about. I mean, you just take that as par for the course. And there are things that will be said in the United States about India that people should, again, just take with some equanimity, because that's the character, of democratic societies.
I want to end by picking up on something that you mentioned yourself, the illiberalism and increasing illiberalism of India's democracy. Most people accept that if Mr. Modi wins again, which perhaps he's likely to do, the illiberal part of India's democracy could get worse. Certainly, protests from minorities, and I'm not just talking about Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, and tribal societies, let's not forget them, will grow hugely if Mr. Modi pushes through the Uniform Civil Code, which increasingly it seems he's determined to do. All of that will be happening just as the strategic shared interest part of the relationship is possibly getting closer. So when that happens, or if it happens, how much of a concern would it be in Washington? And could it, at some point, be a break on the progress of the relationship?
I mean, many of the issues that you raise, Karan, are issues that are, internal to India. And I do not see the United States taking an official view on these subjects. The question for us would be, is there a respect for process? And as long as there is a respect for process, I think the US will live with whatever outcomes the process produces. I do not imagine a president or a US legislator speaking to issues that are really internal to India. I don't see that happening. My general view of all these questions is a very simple one, which is the stronger our democracies are, the more robust our commitment to liberal democracy is, the deeper our relationship will become. We do not want to end up in a bilateral relationship that is conflicted. That is, we have convergences of interests, but we are really embarrassed about the complexion and the character of the other partner with respect to values. That's not where we want to be. That's not the kind of relationship we imagined when President Bush, made those big decisions in 2004, 2005 about moving forward. And so our interests are so strong that we will always reconcile ourselves, to our mutual imperfections. But if we want a relationship that is genuine, warm, and embracing, then I think we will have to, deal with these challenges with respect to values a little more forthrightly than we've done so far. I think the Biden administration has really bent backwards to prevent these issues from becoming problems in the relationship. But that's not a sustainable strategy, depending on what happens in India in the future.
So what you're saying is the more illiberal India becomes, the more there will be questions and second thoughts in America. It may not change the trajectory of the relationship, but it will make people think very carefully about that trajectory.
And I think that was reflected actually in this visit, most unfortunately, right? That you had important constituencies for the first time now publicly raising questions about the character of India's democracy and the character of its politics. And I don't think that is a nice place to be in.
My last question, and it's only partly asked tongue in cheek, but it is a comment that's doing the rounds in India. Does this visit and the high profile nature of it, the second address to Congress, the state visit, the private dinner, does that suggest that President Biden is betting on Modi getting re-elected in 2024? A sort of reverse ab ki baar Trump sarkar?
Well, I don't know what the calculations are or what the estimates are about Modi's re-election prospects, at least not at the official level in the US government. But I would hope that what this visit reflects is a determination to build a durable partnership with India that goes beyond the Prime Minister of the day. Now, Prime Minister Modi has made some very important investments in the United States as a partner, and that's welcome. But those investments, if they are to be meaningful, must outlive his term in office. And I think at the end of the day, that's what any administration in the US would do. It's a vote of confidence in India And individuals may have private views about whether Prime Minister Modi's election or re-election is desirable or not. But I would just underscore the fact that it's the relationship with India that matters, irrespective of who's in office. And we've done quite well so far. I mean, we've had a relationship with Prime Minister Vajpayee, who represented the NDA, and then a relationship with Manmohan Singh, who represented the Congress, and now a relationship with Prime Minister Modi, who represents the BJP. So we've done so well so far.
Ashutosh, thank you very much for making time for me. And more than that, thank you very much for this very thoughtful analysis of how the Modi state visit went on. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.